Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The rain didn't wash away the scent. It only made the metallic tang of fear cling tighter to Julian's skin. He ran, his boots slipping on the wet cobblestones of the estate's rear garden, breath tearing from his lungs in ragged, freezing gasps. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he would see the towering silhouette of the manor that had become his prison, and worse, he might see him. Julian's hand flew to his stomach, shielding it instinctively as he stumbled near the iron gate. Locked. Of course, it was locked. The heavy chains rattled mockingly as he shook them, the sound swallowed by the thunder overhead. Going somewhere, pet? The voice was low, barely louder than the rainfall, yet it vibrated through Julian's marrow like a bass note. It wasn't a question, it was a sentence. Julian froze, his fingers gripping the cold iron bars until his knuckles turned white. He turned slowly. 10 yards away, standing beneath the canopy of an ancient oak, stood Cassian Blackwood. The alpha didn't need an umbrella. The rain seemed to shy away from his imposing figure, or perhaps he simply didn't feel the cold. His eyes, usually the color of glacial ice, were currently burning with a predatory, molten gold, the sign of an alpha pushed to the edge of his control. The contract, Julian whispered, his voice trembling but defiant. Article 4, Section 2. I have the right to personal excursions. Cassian took a step forward. The gravel didn't crunch, it surrendered beneath his weight. That contract, Cassian said, his voice silky and dangerous, was written for an employee, not for the carrier of my heir. Julian's heart stopped. He hadn't told anyone. He had burned the medical report. He had masked his scent with suppressants that made him nauseous. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Cassian was in front of him now, towering, blocking out the stormy sky. A hand, large and scarred, reached out, not to strike, but to rest heavily, possessively, against the flat plane of Julian's abdomen. The heat seeping through Julian's soaked shirt was scorching. I smelled 2 heartbeats the moment you walked into the breakfast room this morning. Cassian leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of Julian's ear, his pheromones, cedar, ozone, and dark chocolate, flooding Julian's senses, forcing his knees to weaken. You thought you could leave? Cassian murmured, his teeth grazing the sensitive pulse point of Julian's neck. The 6 months are irrelevant now, Julian. You are never leaving this house again. 3 months earlier, the boardroom of Blackwood Industries was a shark tank, and Julian Vane was the chum. He sat at the end of a mahogany table long enough to land a plane on, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was a beta, or so his public record stated, struggling with the crippling debt his father had left behind after a failed gambling spree in Macau. Julian was an archivist by trade, a quiet man who preferred the dust of old books to the gleam of corporate warfare. But desperate times had led him to the only man in the city with enough money to make his problems disappear. Cassian Blackwood, the wolf of the capital. Stand up, Cassian commanded from the head of the table. He didn't look up from the file he was reading, Julian's file. Julian stood, his cheap suit feeling tighter around the shoulders. Mr. Blackwood, regarding the loan application. I'm not interested in the loan, Cassian interrupted, finally looking up. His face was a masterpiece of cold aristocracy, high cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes that assessed Julian's worth in a fraction of a second. I'm interested in your genetics. Julian blinked. Excuse me. My grandfather, the chairman, is dying, Cassian said flatly. His will stipulates that control of the conglomerate passes to me only if I am settled. He believes a stable mate will temper my aggressive tendencies. Cassian smirked as if the idea was amusing. I need a mate, Julian. For 6 months. Until the old man passes and the probate period clears. I'm a beta, Julian lied. It was a lie he had maintained for years. Being an Omega without a pack or protection in this city was a death sentence, or worse, a one-way ticket to a trafficking ring. My medical team says otherwise, Cassian said, tossing a folder across the table. It slid perfectly to a stop in front of Julian. It was his real medical history. The suppressants he bought on the black market. The irregular heat cycles he managed in agonizing solitude. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. This is illegal. You can't access these records. I own the hospital network, Cashin replied with a shrug. And I own your father's debt. 70 million. Plus interest. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Here is the deal. Cashin continued, standing and walking toward the window. Looking out over the city he practically ruled. You sign a contract. You live in my penthouse. You attend galas on my arm. You play the part of the devoted, shy Omega who has finally captured the heart of the beast. In exchange, the debt is wiped clean. You get a monthly stipend. And in 6 months, we stage a breakup. You leave with enough money to disappear to whatever quiet library you fancy. And intimacy? Julian asked, his voice barely audible. Cashin turned, his expression unreadable. I don't sleep with employees. I have no interest in love, and certainly no interest in an Omega who smells like anxiety and cheap detergent. This is business, Julian. Purely business. It was the most insulting thing Julian had ever heard. It was also his only lifeline. Where do I sign? The Golden Cage. The penthouse was less a home and more a museum of modern indifference. Chrome, glass, black marble. It was cold, vast, and echoed with silence. For the first month, the contract held. They were two strangers sharing a zip code. Cashin was rarely home before midnight, and Julian spent his days in the library wing or organizing the gala schedules with Cashin's terrified personal assistant. But biology is a treacherous thing. It ignores contracts. It ignores logic. It started with small shifts. A lingering glance across the dinner table. Cashin stepping closer than necessary to adjust Julian's tie before a charity event. The way the air in the room seemed to thicken when they were alone. The turning point was the winter solstice gala. Julian was wearing a suit of white silk that Cashin had commissioned. It fit like a second skin, accentuating the slender curve of his waist and the slope of his neck. The moment they entered the ballroom, hundreds of eyes snapped to them. A rival CEO, a man named Sterling with a greasy smile and a scent like rotting lilies, cornered Julian near the champagne fountain while Cashin was distracted. So, you're the one who leashed the wolf, Sterling sneered, stepping into Julian's personal space. He reached out, his hand sliding inappropriately low on Julian's back. Tell me, how much is he paying you? I could double it for an hour of your time. Julian recoiled, his Omega instincts flaring in panic. Don't touch me. Feisty. Sterling laughed, gripping Julian's arm. I like that. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly. The chatter of the party died. A low, vibrating growl resonated through the floorboards, primal and terrifying. Sterling froze. Cashin was there in a blur of motion. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply grabbed Sterling's wrist, the one holding Julian, and squeezed. There was a sickening crack. Sterling screamed, dropping to his knees. You touch what is mine, Cashin whispered, his voice carrying through the silent hall, and you lose the hand. Next time, it will be your throat. He pulled Julian against his chest, wrapping his arm around Julian's waist so tightly it bruised. For the rest of the night, Cashin didn't let go. He radiated a pheromone cloud of pure dominance. Asterisk mine. 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 Asterisk. Back at the penthouse, the adrenaline and the pheromones boiled over. There was no discussion of the contract. Cashin pushed Julian against the heavy oak door of the bedroom, his control shattering. Julian, overwhelmed by the alpha's protective display and his own repressed instincts, didn't fight. He melted. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. It was a collision of hunger that had been building for weeks. Cashin worshipped Julian's body with a desperation that contradicted his cold persona, and Julian, for the first time in his life, felt safe in the eye of the storm. The next morning, Cashin was gone before Julian woke. A note on the bedside table read, Asterisk the debt is cleared early. Do not leave the apartment today, asterisk. It was the first bar of the cage. The silent shift. Weeks bled into months. The dynamic shifted subtly, but undeniably. Cashin stopped working late. He started demanding Julian eat dinner with him every night. He fired the male gardening staff and replaced them with betas. Julian tried to rationalize it. He's just playing the part. But the part didn't require Cashin to spend hours brushing Julian's hair after a shower, claiming it relaxed him. The part didn't require the intense, burning stares that followed Julian across the room. Then came the sickness. It started as morning fatigue. Then, sensitivity to smells. The coffee Cashin brewed made Julian gag. He attributed it to stress. The contract was halfway done. He had to prepare his exit. But deep down, his wolf knew. He took the test in a public bathroom at the library, far away from Cashin's surveillance. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't supposed to happen. Cashin had been careful, or so Julian thought. But alphas of Cashin's lineage possessed virility that mocked standard contraceptives. Julian stared at the stick, terror seizing his heart. Cashin had been explicit, *6 months. No strings. An heir was the ultimate string. An heir meant Julian would never be free. Or worse, Cashin would take the baby and cast Julian out, destroying him legally and emotionally. He had to leave. Now. Before the scent changed. Before Cashin noticed. He began to siphon cash from the stipend account, converting it to cryptocurrency. He packed a go bag and hid it in the ventilation shaft. He contacted a smuggler who specialized in getting Omegas out of the city. He had a plan. He was going to disappear tonight, during the fiercest storm of the season, when the security sensors were prone to glitches. He hadn't accounted for the nose of a prime alpha. The confrontation. Back in the rain, the standoff continued. You're delusional. Julian spat, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. There is no us, Cashin. There is a contract. A piece of paper that expires in 3 months. I burned it, Cashin said calmly. Julian blinked, the rain stinging his eyes. What? I burned it the morning after the gala, Cashin admitted, stepping closer. He was soaking wet now, his expensive suit ruined, but he looked like a god of war descending upon the earth. I realized then that I had made a miscalculation. A miscalculation? Julian laughed hysterically. Is that what I am? A math error? No. Cashin growled, closing the distance. He grabbed Julian's shoulders, his grip bruising. The error was thinking I could ever let you go. The error was thinking I could taste you once and be satisfied. You don't want me, Julian shouted, pushing against the alpha's chest. You want an heir? You want the inheritance. You used me. I have the inheritance. Cashin roared back, his voice thundering over the storm. My grandfather died 3 days ago. The board voted this morning. I have everything, Julian. Money, power, the city. And none of it means a damn thing if I come home to an empty house. Julian stopped fighting. He stared up at Cashin, shocked by the raw vulnerability in the alpha's eyes. I didn't know about the baby until I smelled you today, Cashin said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. But even before that, I was never going to let you leave. I was going to rewrite the terms until you stayed. I was going to beg if I had to. And for a Blackwood, begging is worse than death. You're terrifying me, Julian whispered. You lock me in. You control my life. That isn't love, Cashin. That's obsession. Maybe, Cashin admitted, his thumb tracing the line of Julian's jaw. But I can learn. Teach me. Stay, and teach me how to love you properly. But do not try to take my mate and my child away from me. That is a line you cannot cross. Julian trembled. The cold was seeping into his bones, but the heat from Cashin was magnetic. And if I want to go? If I don't want to be a prisoner? Cashin's expression hardened, the mask slipping back into place. He scooped Julian up into his arms, bridal style, as effortlessly as if he weighed nothing. Then I will make the cage so comfortable you will forget you ever wanted to fly. Cashin vowed, turning back toward the manor. The unraveling. The weeks that followed were a war of attrition. Julian was on total lockdown. The electronic gates were reinforced. Guards were posted at every exit. Cashin moved his office to the manor, refusing to leave Julian alone for more than an hour. It was suffocating. It was intoxicating. Cashin brought him breakfast in bed every morning. Strange cravings Julian hadn't even voiced, like pickled strawberries and spicy tuna, proving how attuned the alpha was to his scent. He read to the bump at night, his deep voice vibrating through Julian's stomach. But Julian refused to yield. He slept on the edge of the bed. He answered in monosyllables. He was a statue of ice in Cashin's fire. The breaking point came in the form of a threat from the past. Sterling, the humiliated rival, had not forgotten his broken wrist. He had waited for a moment of weakness, and he found it in the leak of information about the secret Omega living in the Blackwood estate. Julian was in the garden, under guard, when the security breach happened. A drone, rigged with an incendiary device, crashed into the greenhouse. The glass shattered. Fire erupted. Julian was thrown back by the blast, shards of glass slicing his arm. He curled around his stomach, coughing in the acrid smoke. Julian. The scream tore through the chaos. Cashin didn't run. He sprinted through the flames. He didn't care about the fire or the structural collapse. He found Julian amidst the wreckage, shielding him with his own body as a beam came crashing down. Cashin took the hit. A heavy iron support slammed into his back, driving him to his knees. He grunted, a sound of pure agony, but he didn't collapse. He scooped Julian up, shielding him from the smoke, and carried him out of the inferno. When the paramedics arrived, they tried to treat Cashin first. His back was a mess of burns and trauma. "Touch him first," Cashin snarled, shoving the medic toward Julian. "And I kill you." He refused treatment until he saw the ultrasound monitor confirm the fetal heartbeat was strong. Only then, as he sat by Julian's hospital bed, his hand holding Julian's, did he allow himself to pass out from the pain. The truce. Julian sat by the bed in the private medical wing of the manor. Cashin was sleeping, face down, his back bandaged. He looked younger in his sleep, the lines of cruelty smoothed away. Julian looked at the sleeping Alpha, then at his own hand resting on his stomach. Cashin had taken a beam of burning iron for him. A man who supposedly only cared about contracts and heirs had walked into fire without hesitation. Julian realized then that the cage wasn't made of gold or iron. It was made of fear. Cashin's fear of loss. Julian's fear of trust. When Cashin woke, groggy and in pain, Julian was still there. "You stayed," Cashin rasped, his voice dry. "The gates were open during the fire," Julian said softly. "I could have run." Cashin tried to push himself up, wincing. "Why didn't you?" Julian reached out, his fingers brushing the hair back from Cashin's forehead. "Because you're an idiot who jumped into a fire for me. And because..." Julian hesitated, then took Cashin's large hand and placed it on his stomach. "Because the baby kicked when he heard your voice." Cashin went still. A look of wonder, pure and unfiltered, broke through his stoic mask. "Truly, yes." Julian sighed, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I'm not signing a new contract, Cashin. I won't be an employee, and I won't be a prisoner." "Anything," Cashin swore. "Name it." "Partners," Julian said firmly. "Equal say. I go where I want. I see who I want. And if you ever try to lock me up again, I will take your son, and you will never find us." Cashin turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with Julian's. He brought Julian's knuckles to his lips, kissing them with a reverence that bordered on religious. "Agreed," Cashin whispered. "You have tamed the monster, Julian. The empire is yours. I am yours." Julian looked out the window. The storm had passed. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the wet grass. The gates were still there, but they didn't look like prison bars anymore. They looked like protection. "Just don't make it a habit," Julian murmured, leaning down to kiss the Alpha's forehead. "I can't handle a martyr." "For you," Cashin said, his eyes closing as he leaned into the touch. "I would burn the world down." And looking at the fierce devotion in the Alpha's face, Julian believed him. And that is how the archivist bound the wolf not with chains, but with a love fierce enough to survive the fire. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the mighty Cashin to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to lock you away if he proved he would die to save you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, Yaoi, Omegaverse, Man 1. Julian, Omega, slim build, soft brown hair, wearing white silk pajamas, hand protectively on small baby bump, sitting on hospital bed, expression of conflicted tenderness. Man 2. Cashin, Alpha, muscular build, black hair, sharp jawline, shirtless with bandages on torso and back, sitting in chair next to bed, holding Julian's hand against his cheek, eyes closed in devotion, exhausted but possessive. Background is a high-end private medical room, rain on window, warm ambient lighting, dramatic shadows, emotional atmosphere, cinematic composition, intricate details.